you've got people who are trapped in the process of the thing. That they are now in the business of making money. They have, in essence, quite literally sold out. Right? So, the grand idea of making a big difference, right? Of pushing past relatively accepted norms and standards, that you would ultimately come to a place where the only way I can survive is if I turned this ideation, ratio, degree into a viable business. And in that, I have linked my energy up with the pervading markets, the stock market, everything that's affecting my business, right? And even more so, the occulted or hidden aspects, right? Where now you are dealing, again, we talked in the last excerpt, number 7, was about the Masonic jungle. There's plenty of places that you can go to garner, to get more information on this. What is ultimately happening is you are being subjugated, disallowed, barred from doing in succession that next obvious thing, which is to sin or sign against the self. That truly what you have seen, what you have experienced is the fact that you're no longer going to support yourself as a falsified mechanism in within the construct of a falsified field or quasi-community in its state. You're not going to do it anymore. And in that, all privileges are then stripped away. You are no longer an entered apprentice, right? You are no longer going to be celebrated, right, in your contributions toward the grand scheme. You have deviated off the path. And this right here is a very important, critical point. Is that, and here, I am still alive talking about this. And how is it that I'm alive? See, many people have gotten to this place. I was chatting with Nathaniel Gillis the other night, and I laid some really heavy stuff on him, and I had actually refined what I was going to say. It even inspired me to write down finally into a book that I'm writing right now about these experiences, right? These crazy ass experiences that I wanted to dismiss. Yeah, you think that every experience, including, if you're just talking about someone who's an elite athlete that goes off to the Olympics, they know somebody's gonna outdo me one day. Might take 50 years, might take 100 years, right? Someone's gonna outdo me, and they're going to beat this record. And in fact, I not only warrant and want that, I'm now a patron, an honored patron of the institution of whatever this sport is, right? And so we go under the guise of this. There's the biomechanical aspect. There's all the coaching. There's the nutrition, right? And it is a corporation. Anytime you incorporate other people into an endeavor, You are talking about a particular outcome of display. And not only that, you're going through the pageantry of doing this for city, right? For state, for township, right? You're not just doing it on your own. It is not a selfish pursuit. So in this, the pervading powers that be want to say, we have given you the supreme construct that you couldn't have thought of yourself. And where in fact, with esoteric principles of light, I went in and I said, that's absolutely not true. That is a lie. There is a better way. The way is right out there in front of all of us in the display of this Fibonacci or phi sequence that most people kind of looked at, didn't know what to do with, and put it back on the shelf and went, oh, this is just another frequency you can tap into, right? There's never this arrivement where, what if this is it? What if you have reached this place where this will progress you in your development and give you a reason for living, right? On a higher status or higher tier. And so you see, if I've been in pursuit of this the whole time, well, it's part of the process. It's part of coming into this mind, right? Where you no longer are going to deviate back to, right? When I say deviate, you're no longer going to go back to you're no longer going to be the profane. You're no longer going to fall back on going out on Friday nights and hooking up in total debauchery and pretending that that's actually a pleasurable thing. You're no longer going to have Planned Parenthoods or need Planned Parenthoods because the people in your society, in your community, have come to a higher mind. They have seen the destruction. They have seen the loss. They have seen the selfishness of their ways, and they are no longer going to allow the dark and the light, right? The five-pointed satanic pentagram that everybody really worships and keeps alive, right? The alcohol, the bars, the lack of nutrients, the fact that we have at our disposal herbs and nutrients that should be freely growing everywhere that allow us to achieve optimal health. That we understand the windows, right? And this has gone into the very destructive aspects of what Trump represents, where he talks about meritocracy out in the open, right? He talks about the merits. And the meritocracy isn't reaching the phi or phi-based formulation. It is not creating the most benevolent and altruistic mechanism that offers people everything that they need for total, complete and total development that never ends and produces what is this flower of life, what is this beautiful burgeoning monad, right? Where it's like, look, over and over again, they're going to do the same thing. We might as well benefit from creating, kind of paraphrasing Warren Buffett, and yes, Elon Musk is in that too. Look, you can't posit or posture yourself in a way that says you haven't been playing both sides. If you have come into, in this corrupted system, if you have come into that type of wealth, you are either aware of the occult, which I very much think that Elon Musk is actually just a robot that is receiving transmissions and I don't believe that he's produced anything viable or worthy ever. I never have. Everything is based on exploitation. He literally acts it out like this self-proclaimed divine nerd, right? Who is going to play down and pander down. Oh no, I didn't do occult rituals. Oh no, I don't think about doing things through a numeric process that's based on this deviations away from, where on certain days I do certain things and I don't talk about it, right? In certain ways I use and don't talk about it, this satanic pentagram, and go through the process of using the means by which to assert and ascertain things for myself, but it's for the greater good. That is so generically embedded in everyone, that we can no longer just sit back and say that is enough, that will suffice. And it's out there in front of all of us. In fact, all the things that the Knights Templars and the old school Druids represented, which was self-sufficiency, right? When it became bastardized, there are people, probably more theologians, that mapped out when this took place, right? And you had people who were literally crusading. There was John Quincy Adams, who was thought to be, and even regarded himself as one of the most boring people. But he literally saw what was happening with the Masonic orders and was essentially at personal war with them, right? So you can see why he's not talked about more often, right? Where he's really recognizing that it's going to be boring fighting against this, but we have to go back to moral stature, moral state, or moral status, because at that time there wasn't the information that's available now. Now, it's crazy. We know the most profound information that I'm talking about right here, and it is seen in the Fibonacci sequence. It is seen, in what you would esteem as Metatron's cube, right? But it is not to become an occulted ideation that's only available for the few. We need to look at this in the same way that we're approaching everything, from nutritional sciences to structures, right? Looking at the deviations that were intentionally performed over months and years-long efforts through construction of such architecture, through the development of such religions that were and beyond implicit, that directly implicate a particular group as to have been working against society. And that is kind of a positive that I see occurring out here in the open, is that there seems to be a grand push toward this, that there are people who are putting this. And so the odd thing is, where it does get woo-woo, where it does get metaphysical, is those who are learning to meditate on this, that realize that this is never going to be taken serious in court. It's never going to be taken serious because the laws and the bylaws and the policy are all subjugating to this, right? To the satanic pentagram. I mean, they even go through the process of pointing it upside down during the Obama administration and putting it right out in your face, It's kind of like, here's your disclosure. Do you still want it? Like, you're the people, we the people. You're still asking for it. You're still living by way of this, like you are called the profane because you're profane. I've been the profane, right? We're living within the mechanism of profanity. This is the big question here, though, is once we break past that, if that's possible, and we are using all the positivity, all the culmination of this energy toward a divine pursuit, is that the end? Is the entropy, right? Is the entropy entirely necessary? Which is something that I've thought, right? And I think that that's where these guys come back to, is that they feel like the greater good isn't the greatest good, right? It's not creating a perfect environmental structure for everyone to develop and become their best. Some people can't develop. right? And I think part of the knowledge that they think that they came privy to is the fact that's alluded to in Genesis, right? And I'm sure that there are undisclosed, like Smithsonian held units of measure, informations, documents that state also very clearly, non-abstractly, that there were a whole different race of people, of human beings. The Denisovians, some have talked about that. You can get into Australopithecus and Neanderthal and the fact that supposedly there were other competing races of peoples. And then you can depict this with certain tribes. You can look at this, not only Adam and Eve, but you get into the aspects of Cain and Abel and this sort of vying for the so-called, it's not a master race, it's the most usable, right? And so you could say people reached a place where they were complete jackasses, right? Not unlike today, and they were falling into ritualization, and there was no way for them to break free from the ideation of these very dark occult practices. And the more you give them, the deeper in they go. And we see that evident today. That's one thing that I do agree on with Nathaniel Gillis, is where he's talking about Gary Nolan and others. He doesn't say it outright or overtly every time, but I've seen him in interviews where he does name these people, and it's just to say, that this group of people, how can they just say that, specifically Tim Taylor, I'm not going to say Gary Nolan, but I'm saying he's kind of in the middle there, right? Because he is an educator, because he is a professor, because he is a working academic, he has a lot of sway and pull, and he must know that the energy that he carries himself with, right, and the ultimate information that he's going to come out with isn't separate. It's not a secular concept when you are in league with people who are building altars, right, and worshiping an unseen deity that very much harkens, like, no matter what name you want to call it, Moloch, Baal, Lucifer, Satan, if you want to get into many other, Mithraic type traditions, or if you want to go off into so many different areas, or get into muses, or getting to the Hindu aspect of there being multiple gods, or a god for every person, essentially. You get into this aspect of energetics and interplay, and you have to be very honest with yourself that it's just a different name, it's just a different moniker, and you're confusing yourself. And for somebody who has reached such a high intellectual, self-perceived status, and is getting paid so much money and coming forth with something called the Soul Foundation, SOL, right? Harken back to the sun itself, this heliocentric center point, right? Like, come on, is it a sun worshiping cult, right? And does the sun have consciousness? Does the sun choose? And I won't even get into my personal experiences with that, but that is something that cannot be refuted or denied. And what are we really doing here, right? So you get into the areas of that I come to even right now, where it's like, well, who are you going through this grand effort for? Is it that person who I've met, and I've actually sacrificed an entire decade of my life trying to prove to myself, right, through the passage of time, that certain people had the same propensity, prowess, distinguishing attribute to go back to the phi or phi golden mean, to see that this is an area of development and it must be eventually used in a very responsible way. And that's where I'm breaking off here, is that I'm saying what is the greater good? Is the responsibility for those people who will never see it, and they will ultimately be the very people who are bowing down to these the same gods and the same godheads over and over again, where they are the ones that are bringing about the satanic worship. They are the ones who are worshiping the golden calf or the golden cow because they get the immediate, acute response. They don't want to wait. They don't mind getting shortchanged by the thing, by the entity, and we're always being tested. And when you get to the place where you're like, that's not enough. Well, that's not enough. And that's not good enough. And no, I don't accept that as an answer. I don't accept that as an answer. And then you see that it is this energetic pathway that doesn't cease. It doesn't stop. And the torch has to be carried on. And your education and your development is something, you become a viable measure. You become a viable resource. You're no longer considered one of the profane. You've gone through all the profane aspects. You realize that as long as you live in the lower tiers of the Masonic jungle, you will be subjugated and subverted back to that behavior as a mechanism, and that you can't break free from it, but you will not stop trying. You will not stop making effort, right? And that mind isn't something that is going to be on expiry, right? Is when you finally reach this state or this status, that to be beneficent to those minds who are like-minded but tend to fall back toward other ideations, i.e. the worship of other gods or godheads or figureheads, right? And they're high-level academics. They understand the intricacies and the process that I'm talking about, but they tend to fall back on a lot of what you would consider the slave morality, where they are getting an immediate response. They're not going to take their time, right? So is worship and is ritual inevitable in this process, right? Or is coming to the altar greed? And when you enter as the entered apprentice, you're really greedily hungry, and you're asking for, I want more of that.